In 2008, two economists at the University of Chicago decided to chase down a rumor. They wanted to find the original data from one of the most famous psychology experiments in history. Everyone in the field had been told it was lost. Generations of textbooks had built whole theories on top of it. There was a story everyone knew about what the data showed, and in 100 years, nobody had actually gone back and looked. Their names were Stephen Levitt and John List. Levitt is best known for co-writing Freakonomics. List had spent his career running field experiments on what people actually do versus what they say they do. They were curious about a single set of records archived somewhere from a factory floor in Cicero, Illinois in 1924. When they finally tracked the carbon copies down sitting in a university archive in upstate New York and ran the numbers through modern statistical software, they found something nobody had expected. The original story was almost entirely fabricated. To understand what they discovered, you have to know the story they grew up hearing. Every business student in the world has heard it. So has every psychology undergraduate. It goes like this. In the 1920s, an industrial researcher walked into the Hawthorne Works, a sprawling Western electric factory outside Chicago that built telephone parts. He wanted to know whether brighter light would make the workers more productive. So he ran an experiment, he brightened the lights, productivity went up, he dimmed the lights, productivity went up again, he left the lights alone, productivity still went up. The conclusion, which became one of the most cited findings in 20th century social science, was that the lighting itself didn't matter. What mattered was that someone was watching. The workers performed better simply because they were being observed. A man named Henry Landsberger gave it a name in 1958. He called it the Hawthorne effect. The mere act of being watched, the story said, was enough to change a human being's behavior. The trouble with the story is that almost none of it survives contact with the actual data. The Hawthorne illumination experiments were sponsored by the National Research Council, and they ran from 1924 to 1927. The original results were never properly published. The data was thought to have been destroyed, and for 80 years, the only thing anybody had to work with was a brief summary written for a trade journal in 1927 and a few retellings, each of them slightly more dramatic than the last. Levitt and List recovered the carbon copies. They ran the actual numbers. What they found was that productivity did not, in fact, go up when the lights were dimmed. There was no neat, clean, lighting doesn't matter pattern. There were larger Monday morning bumps and predictable seasonal patterns that nobody had controlled for. The famous result, the one that launched 1,000 management consultancies, was an artifact of memory and retelling. It was a story that had grown more confident every time it was told until the story replaced the data, and then the data was lost, and then the story became the data. By the time Levitt and List finished their analysis in 2009, the field was forced to acknowledge something quietly embarrassing. The most famous discovery in industrial psychology was a phenomenon that in the original experiments had not really been demonstrated. And yet, nobody could quite bring themselves to throw the idea away, because here is what's strange. The story may have been false, the underlying claim was not. Over the last 50 years, in dozens of laboratories using methods nobody had in 1924, researchers have shown again and again that human beings really do change their behavior when they think they are being watched. The mechanism Mayo's team never actually proved turned out to be one of the most replicable findings in modern psychology. It just had to be discovered properly by people who were not telling themselves a story. In 2006, a behavioral biologist at Newcastle University named Melissa Bateson ran a small, almost mischievous experiment. She and her colleagues placed an honesty box in a university coffee room, the kind where you pay for your drink on the trust system. Above the price list, they alternated two images each week. One week, a picture of flowers. The next week, a picture of a pair of human eyes staring straight out at the person about to pour the coffee. People paid almost 3 times as much when the eyes were watching them than when the flowers were. Nobody told them they were being studied. There was no manager. The eyes were a printout taped to the wall. The brain of every person who walked into that coffee room knew on some level it could not override that a face was watching. And the body did what bodies do when a face is watching. It behaved. In 2012, a team at Newcastle followed up with a much bigger study. They put signs of watching eyes on bike racks across a university campus paired with a single line of text: "You are being watched." Bicycle theft at those locations dropped by 62%. The eyes weren't real. There were no cameras. The signs cost almost nothing. The effect was larger than most place-based crime prevention measures cost millions of dollars to produce. In laboratory dictator games where participants are given a sum of money and decide how much to share with a stranger, people consistently give more when a stylized image of eyes is displayed in the corner of the screen. A 2013 meta-analysis of 15 such experiments, covering more than 2,000 participants, found that watching eye cues reduced antisocial behavior by 35%. The Hawthorne story was a myth, but the thing the myth was trying to point at turned out to be one of the strongest forces in human social behavior. We are wired, somewhere very old in the brain, to behave differently when we believe a face is looking at us. So old, in fact, that we will behave better in front of a photograph of a face we know is not real, taped to a wall in a coffee room, than in front of no face at all. And here is where this stops being a story about old factories and printed eyes. For most of human history, the watching was rare. A village of 50 people, a market square, the eyes of your neighbors, your kin, the elders. The brain calibrated itself for a world in which most of your hours were unobserved, and a few were watched, and you adjusted your behavior accordingly. In the last 15 years, every part of that has reversed. The average person now carries a camera with them at all times. Into the bathroom, into the bedroom, into the funeral. Every street corner in every major city is filmed by multiple devices, most of them owned by no one in particular. Every conversation any of us has on a phone could be screenshotted. Every search we run is logged in a server. Every video we watch is reported back to the platform that served it. Every gesture in many homes is recorded by a small black puck on a counter that is always listening, waiting for its name. The eyes are everywhere now. Most of them are not human. Many of them belong to no person we could name. But the brain that evolved in the village does not know the difference. It only knows that the room is full of watching. If a single printed pair of eyes in a coffee room can change how much money people put in a box, what is happening to a generation that is, by any honest accounting, never not being watched? The answer, judging by the research that has been coming in over the last decade, is that we are slowly losing access to the part of ourselves that only exists when nobody is looking. There is a category of human experience that, for most of our species' history, only happened in unobserved time: the half-formed thought, the bad joke told only to oneself, the face you make in private that you would never make in a photograph, the early draft, the wrong opinion you needed to try on before figuring out what you actually believed, the version of yourself that exists when no one is grading. That version of you needs unobserved time the way a plant needs darkness. It cannot photosynthesize in the spotlight. Many of the things that eventually become a person's actual self are quietly assembled in private and then much later brought into the light. If there is no private, there is no quiet assembly. If there is no quiet assembly, the public version is all there is. A camera on every device is not a surveillance state. A camera on every device is a metaphysical pressure. It changes what kind of thoughts you let yourself have. It changes what kind of mistakes you let yourself make. It changes what kind of person you can become, because becoming requires a workshop, and the workshop has, for 2 million years, been the inside of your own head without an audience. The Hawthorne effect, as originally told, was a story about workers in a factory making more telephones because someone was paying attention. That story is mostly a fairy tale. The real Hawthorne effect, the one the research keeps confirming, is much stranger and much harder to look at. It is that human beings, when they sense they are being watched, slowly stop being able to do anything else. We perform, we curate, we adjust, we become, in front of the lens, the version of ourselves we think the lens is asking for. We do this even when the lens is a photograph. We do this even when the lens is imagined. The brain that evolved on a savanna does not know the difference between a real camera and a printed pair of eyes taped to a wall. It only knows whether the room is full of watching. And in 2026, the room is full. Every room is full. Even this one, even now.